When I found out that my wife had taken a lover, I was first overwhelmed with anger, followed by apathy. I had to take control of myself to make firm and measured decisions. Anger and apathy wouldn't help me. We had lived together for 23 years. During which we had a daughter and opened a restaurant business. Everything was going well. In our family, you could say. There was almost complete harmony. When I first asked my wife about her lover, she didn't blink, blush, or even show any signs of nervousness. She calmly said it was utter nonsense. For some time, after learning about her affair, I re-examined all the years we had spent together, searching for things I might have missed, something I might have done wrong, or something I failed to do. In the end, after a month and a half, my wife confessed. She admitted it quietly, with tears, asking for forgiveness. She said she would end the relationship and that she needed no one else but me. But how could I believe her when she had lied for an entire year and a half? I didn't ask her who he was, where they met, or other details. I only asked why. Why hadn't she ended it immediately? She replied that she needed to inform him in person and look him in the eye. I then asked her what she wanted to see in his eyes, and why she didn't want to look into mine and see what was there. My wife couldn't answer either question. Then I asked her when she planned to tell him it was over. She answered quickly, saying, "Tomorrow." I thought, okay, let it be. Still, I felt and knew deep inside that one conversation wouldn't be the end of it. The next morning, she left to check on our restaurants to ensure everything was in order, promising to return by lunchtime. She returned only the following evening. As soon as she stepped through the door, she declared that her relationship with the other man was over, and said she had stayed overnight at her friend Sveta's house. Sveta even called me during the day, saying that my wife was having a nervous breakdown, couldn't speak, and that Sveta couldn't let her leave in such a state. Sveta said my wife would come home the next day. What they didn't know was that I was aware Sveta had been 400 kilometers away from our city for 2 weeks, taking care of her sick mother. Another lie. This lie finally killed any trust I had left in my wife. I didn't mention that I knew the truth about Sveta. My wife tried to prepare dinner, but nothing was going right. She dropped things, spilled salt, and was generally out of sorts. I silently watched her actions and remembered the kitchen, the times when we had first bought this apartment, furnished it, and prepared meals together, smiling at each other and discussing all kinds of things. Now I didn't care anymore, and everything was happening in complete silence. We didn't speak to each other until bedtime, when my wife wished me good night. I didn't respond. The next morning, I went out to check on our stores. Let me provide a bit of backstory. When we got married, I had a small grocery store that could barely fit 20 people, and my wife had a rented stall in a large shopping center. That's how we started. It was tough. Money was tight, and there were challenges with purchasing stock. But we learned how to solve problems together, deciding what to buy first, what to postpone, and where to get the best deals. This habit of jointly discussing plans extended into our family life. We always decided together what to do, where to go, what to buy, and even what to give friends as gifts. We took pride in our ability to solve almost any problem together, to listen and understand each other, and to reach agreements without forcing opinions on one another. Of course, we made mistakes, but we corrected them together. Eventually, we moved into the restaurant business and even considered hiring a chef from France or Italy, but we decided to hold off on that. That day, after checking on the stores, I spent the night driving aimlessly around the city. I listened to music and thought about the past, about the bright moments when our successes brought us joy, when our daughter was born, when we opened our first restaurant, when we surprised each other with gifts, when we spontaneously went to Paris and spent an entire week in France without leaving the hotel room, just making love and enjoying each other's company. Don't think such things don't happen. They do. They happen to us. It felt like we were young again, experiencing everything for the first time. Then, 23 years later, this happens. My daughter called, asking where her mother and I were, as she and her husband had already arrived at the house. But no one was home. My wife was the one who had initiated this family gathering. I told my daughter and her husband to get the keys from the concierge. Go inside and wait for us. I said I'd pick up her mother from work, and we'd be there soon. But when I got to the restaurant where my wife was supposedly working, she wasn't there. I called another restaurant. Still nothing. That day, she hadn't shown up at any of our stores or called anyone. When I dialed her number, I heard the automated message. The subscriber is unavailable. I hung up and didn't try calling again. I drove home alone. We celebrated as a trio, me, my daughter, and her husband. We looked through family photo albums, reminiscing about funny moments. My daughter kept asking where her mother was. I lied, saying she had an urgent matter. Her phone had died and she probably wouldn't make it. It hurt to lie, but what else could I do? Strangely, as we flipped through the album and told stories about her childhood, I felt lighter. Perhaps it's true that good memories are healing. My wife returned home after the children had left. When I asked if she wanted to explain what was happening and where she had been, she firmly replied that she'd been working. When I asked why her phone was off, she claimed the battery had died and she'd left it at work. Another lie. I asked her if she wanted to stop lying and finally tell me the truth. She didn't. I told her I'd clean up the kitchen, to which she responded with surprise. Did we have guests? Yes, I said. Your daughter and son-in-law came for the family gathering you organized. I brought the family album from the kitchen, and when my wife noticed it, she asked to see it. She wanted to know what we had been looking at. Well, we're looking at family photos, I told her. We were telling stories about how we met, how we built our lives, and how our daughter grew up. After handing her the album, I returned to the kitchen to clean up. Then, I went to the living room, turned on the TV, and sat quietly. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a man in a suit stood on the doorstep. My wife approached the door to see who had come so late. I saw her face change completely and realized everything at once. The man called her by her full name. She quickly stepped into the hallway, closed the door behind her, and returned only 20 minutes later, holding her phone. I didn't react to her appearance. I think she understood that I knew who the man was. For the next month there was silence and complete estrangement. My wife lived her own life, separate from me. Surprisingly, I didn't feel oppressed by this state of affairs. Unlike before, finally I'd had enough. One morning I told her we needed to have a very serious conversation. I said I could no longer live with someone who didn't need me, whose lies had destroyed all my faith, hope, and love. She cried, murmuring, "Forgive me." I told her that tonight I intended to put an end to all the uncertainty in our relationship. That evening, I returned home first, but my wife didn't come back until closer to midnight. The first thing she did was head for the shower, saying she was exhausted after a difficult day at work. You won't believe this, but her lie made me so angry that I nearly yelled at her. She hadn't been at work at all. I had spent the day checking both of our restaurants and all our stores. Still, I held back. Instead, I told her that she didn't need to wash off the scent of another man. I no longer claimed the right to be her man. We used to be. I asked her where she had been that day. Realizing that lying wouldn't work, she stayed silent. I told her I wanted a divorce. I was tired of her constant infidelity. When she suddenly tried to object, claiming she had broken up with her lover, I asked, "How many times have you supposedly broken up with him?" Her response was silence. I told her she wasn't ready for a constructive conversation and that we would talk tomorrow. For the first time in our family life, while she was still in the house, I slept alone on the couch in the living room. Next morning I found her in the kitchen. Her face was swollen, her eyes red from crying. It was clear she had spent the entire night sobbing. Honestly, I thought there would be no conversation that day. But to my surprise, she said she was ready. Here's what I learned from her confession. The lover had once been a supplier of household chemicals for our business. He had fallen in love with her years ago, but she hadn't felt anything for him and told him as much. He left, and soon after I entered her life. She fell in love with me. and we got married. But 3 years ago, he reappeared. By then, he was more mature, charming, and persistent. She admitted that around that time she started feeling insecure, thinking that in her 40s she was no longer attractive to men. My attention no longer felt special to her. She began to take my affection for granted, seeing it as routine and even insincere at times. She craved attention from other men, and when the supplier returned, his interest filled that void. She explained that she hadn't meant for things to happen the way they did, but she also acknowledged that she understood the risks. She knew that if I found out, it would destroy everything. She had hoped the truth would never come to light. Tearfully, she insisted she still loved me, that she always had, and didn't know how she would live without me. But at the same time, she admitted that she had been unable to leave her lover. She didn't know what had kept her with him for so long. She said she had tried to end things with him many times, but every time she went to say goodbye, she would end up staying. Last night, however, she was certain it was over. She told me that after seeing our family album, she had realized how much she loved me and only me. She swore that she didn't need anyone else, that no one else could ever compare. She cried and begged for forgiveness. I sat in silence, listening to her. When she finished, I told her the truth. I couldn't forgive her. Not anymore. I reminded her of how she had once promised to end the relationship, claiming she just needed to see him in person. Yet she had lied to me. She had deceived me again and again. I asked her why she had felt the need to lie so often. Why hadn't she come to me with her insecurities or doubts, like we always used to do? Why hadn't she asked me to help her? And why of all nights had she finally decided to end things with her lover? Was it because she feared divorce? She replied that she had spent the entire night looking through the family album. After saying this, she broke into hysterics, falling to her knees and begging me not to leave her. She promised to do anything I asked, whatever it took to make things right. I picked her up and carried her to the bedroom, laying her on the bed. I spent the next hour calming her down, giving her water and medication, holding her in my arms. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was comforting a woman who had once been my wife but now felt like a stranger to me. I had burned out. The love I once had for her was gone. Later that evening, we returned to the conversation. I told her, I can't trust you anymore. I don't see you as my wife. We can remain friends and business partners, but as a family, we're finished. I quoted lines from Omar Khayyam: drive away friends who have betrayed you once, those who betray once, those who betray once, well, betray twice. I told her that I only saw her as part of my past. She had no place in my present or future. After the divorce, she tried to rekindle our relationship several times, but I refused. Even my daughter asked me to give her mother another chance, but I couldn't. I didn't want to.